Hi, and welcome to this lesson on Spring Java configuration. So in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to see how to use the Java configuration feature of Spring Boot to configure our different concrete classes as Spring Beans and how to do dependency injection using this Java configuration. So in the previous lesson, we saw what application layering meant and what Spring is and what is this concept of dependency injection, and also we touched upon the idea of application context. Let's now implement all of that in this lesson. So what I'm going to do first is, in an earlier lesson we had created this layered application. I'm going to take all those layers, that is the domain layer, the data access layer, the service layer, and the UI layer. I'm leaving out the main because we already have a main in our Spring Boot based application. So I'm taking all these different layers, copying them, and pasting it inside the SRC main Java of our Spring Boot based project. So now we have all those layers. Now, what I want to do is now achieve loose coupling. That is, I do not want new operator to be used to instantiate the concrete classes. Instead, I want Spring to do this instantiation. So let's start from the very last layer, which is the data access layer. So let me go to the concrete class in there. Now, when we look at this concrete class, does this class have dependency on a concrete object from some other layer? No. So this is the last layer. This does not have dependency on any other layer. So let me go to the service layer. So in service layer's concrete class, we were doing new on a concrete class from the data access layer. So this is what is leading to tight coupling. So with dependency injection, as we have already discussed, we're going to use the push approach and not the pull approach. This is the pull approach. So therefore, to use the push approach, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to declare this variable customer DAO, and I'm going to comment out this new operator altogether, and which means right now this value of this variable DAO is null. I want the outside world, the framework, to be able to inject this as a dependency. So I'm going to design a setter method for it. So in Eclipse, to design a setter method, I can just type set and the first letter of that variable, D, and then I can do control space, and it should offer to complete the setter method for us. So I have a set DAO method in customer service implementation class, and this will be used by Spring Framework's Java configuration to inject the dependency. Right, this is the change to the service layer. Similarly, I'm going to go to the UI layer. Now, UI layer has dependency on service layer. Again, it was acquiring the dependency by directly doing the new operation. So again, I'm going to redesign it to use dependency injection. So no more new. So I'll comment this out. And I will design a setter method, set s control space, and there we have the set service method. And this set service method should somehow be called from the outside to inject the service layer object into the UI layer. So these are the changes that we have made to the service layer and the UI layer. Now I have to somehow tell Spring that these are the three beans. The DAO concrete class, the service layer concrete class, and the UI layer concrete class are the three beans. I hope you remember the definition of what a Spring Bean is. A Spring Bean is nothing but an object which is instantiated and managed by Spring. So I have to somehow tell Spring that these are the three beans, and the DAO object should be injected into service object, and service object should be injected into UI object. So to do that, as we saw, there are multiple ways of supplying configuration metadata to Spring. We said XML, Java annotations, and Java code are the three different ways. First, let's look at the Java code as a way of supplying configuration metadata to Spring. So I'm going to go to this base package. Notice the package structuring, that form.training is the base package which contains our main, and all the other beans belong to the sub packages within that package. So I'm going to go to this base package, and in this base package, I'm going to create a new Java class which is going to act as configuration class, and I'm going to give it a name customer app configuration. So I'm calling this class as customer app configuration. The name captures that this is a configuration class. So in this class, I have to let Spring know that this is a configuration class. That is done by making use of an annotation called @configuration. This @configuration comes from org.springframework.context.annotation package. Now, since this is a Java-based configuration, each bean definition will be done in the form of a factory method. First, I'm going to define a method for instantiating the DAO object. So therefore, I'm going to create a method public, then customer DAO, the interface as the return type, and I'm going to call the method name as DAO object. So this method name happens to be the default ID for the bean as well. So I'll call it DAO object. So here I'm going to instantiate customer DAO, the concrete class, the in-memory implementation. Customer DAO in-memory implementation DAO equals new customer DAO in-memory implementation. And return this object, return DAO. And I have to tell Spring that this is actually a bean definition factory method. That is done in Java configuration by annotating this method with @bean. I'll annotate this with @bean. So this is Java configuration with one bean definition factory method. Similarly, I will have to create two more bean definition factory methods. So I will create a bean definition factory method for the service layer. So I'll make the return type customer service and call this method service obj, service object. And inside this method, I'm going to create an object of the concrete class, the customer service implementation class service equal to new customer service implementation class. And this service object in turn has a dependency on the DAO. And if you recall, we had designed a setter method to inject that dependency. So I need to inject the dependency in Java configuration. So I will call service.setDAO, and I'll invoke the other factory method, DAO object. After injecting the dependency, I'll return the service object. And I have to tell Spring that this is another bean definition method. So I'll annotate this method also with @bean. Similarly, I need to design the third bean definition method, public, the UI layer class, the customer console UI, and I'll call the method as UI object. And inside this, I'm going to create an object of the UI layer class equal to new UI layer class. And I'm then going to inject the dependency. If you recall, we had designed a setter method inside it. So I'll do UI.setService. It has a dependency on the service layer. Don't do new again. Instead, call that bean definition factory method, service obj, and then return that UI object. And mark this method as being a bean definition factory method @bean. And that's it. That's our configuration class. Now let's revisit main. So if we go to our main, so in main, what we're doing is we are creating, or rather this STS has created a line of code which calls Spring application.run. If you closely observe this run method, you will see that the return type of this run method is a special type of application context object, or application context object is the Spring container, and that Spring container is built by this run method, and we need to get hold of that Spring container to work with the beans that it creates. So I'm going to change the line of code here to application context Spring container equal to Spring application.run. This application context comes from org.spring framework. So it builds the application context, or it builds the Spring container, and it would automatically look inside the base package and all its sub packages for classes with special annotations. And that configuration is one such special annotation. It would automatically pick up that configuration class and come to know which the beans are. And it would automatically create all the beans. So therefore, I can ask Spring to get hold of a particular bean. So I'm going to ask Spring, hey Spring, give me an object of that UI layer class. So I'm going to call, I need an object of type, the customer console UI equal to Spring container dot, there is a method get bean. So there are multiple variants of this get bean. I'm going to use the variant which takes a class, and I'm going to pass the type of that bean, customer console UI dot class. So this is like saying, they're like asking Spring, hey Spring, give me an object of type customer console UI. So once Spring returns that object, notice that we are not doing new. We are not creating our own object. Because if we create our own object, dependency injection and all other enhancements on that object will not happen. So we want to get hold of that object created by Spring. Remember that Spring bean is an object, not a class. So once I have this bean object, I can call a method on it, ui.create customer with UI. Let's see if it runs and if the dependency injection is happening correctly. Right, so we seem to have got the bean. And let's check out and so you see we're getting the ID generated, which means the dependency injection worked just fine. So this is how we use Spring Java configuration. So we use Java configuration of Spring to achieve dependency injection. This is also known as explicit configuration because we explicitly created a separate configuration class.